Welcome everybody to the seasonal diet, eating what our ancestors ate when they ate it like we were evolved to do. One of the biggest problems with organ meat, let me rephrase that, I should say the only problem with organ meat is that it doesn't taste very appetizing a lot of the time. So we all know that the heart or the liver or the marrow or all that stuff, it's some of the healthiest things you can eat, full of nutrition and other benefits. But it's just not that pleasant to eat sometimes unless you cook it perfectly right. And even if you're eating a lot of it, for example, if it's done right, I can eat a few pieces of liver and it tastes nice. But if you make a whole meal out of it and you're trying to get a high amount of protein, if you're trying to eat 1, 2, 300 grams of it, that is really a lot, and you start to feel a bit sick to your stomach after eating too much of that. The flavor is just, that's too hearty even for me. Our ancestors, though, as usual, they had an answer for this. They would cook all this stuff together. If you saw my last video that I did earlier in the week about boiling, you know that this was the main way of cooking in Northern Europe for the longest time, and humans would just put everything in there. A big pot. They'd put the regular meat in there, but also the liver and the bones and the heart and the brains, and depending on the animal, anything else that was edible pretty much. And of course they threw their water and the broth or whatever vegetables and spices they wanted to put in there too. And that's the way the nutrition really gets into the soup or stew either way. So even then, if you don't like the taste of heart or liver, or you think it's gross, for example, or whatever, some reason you don't want to eat that much of it, you only have to have a little piece of it in that stew or in that soup that you boil up, and then the nutrition gets there and the whole thing. And even if you come across of it, you get a spoon, there's a little piece of heart in there, you're like, oh, I'll just eat it. Okay, it wasn't that good, but then you can have a nice spoon of something nice, some chicken thighs or some steak or some whatever good meat that you actually do like in there to clear your taste buds. And this was the complete normal thing to do up until just a couple hundred years ago, actually. Then these things, these organ meats in the stews, all of a sudden disappear out of the recipe books. This happened around the Victorian area. The nobles actually started to look down upon the peasants and stigmatize these organ meats that they were all eating. Maybe there's a conspiracy theory in there because the result was a massive decline in health and even height and stature. People were actually getting smaller and weaker in the Industrial Revolution because of this, because they were cutting out a lot of these things in the diet that they did before, but now they were being stigmatized and looked down upon by doing so. It was probably, maybe even planned by the upper class in the industrial area, because they wanted the peasants to seem too sick and small and weak to stand up to the factory owners and the rulers of the time. Unfortunately, we still have a bit of this stigma today in society, and even finding a lot of these organ meats in stores is just not that accessible. But have no fear, I will do a couple of recipes on these things, and there are some places to get these organ meats if you know where to look. And yeah, there is plenty of good recipes, and like I said, you can cook everything just exactly like you were doing before, but maybe you put a little bit of liver in there or a little bit of heart in there, and it really gives it some extra flavor and nutrients. So I will be doing these coming up. We're trying to bring some of these back so you can follow the channel and keep an eye out in the next couple months. So how about you guys? Do you have any recipes like this? Any organ meats and stews? Or do you have any special ways you like to cook it? Any recipes from different places in the world, depending on where your ancestors from? Let us know in the comments. We would all love to hear.